Right, Chevre, good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today Yerushalmi, Trumais, Perek Hey, Halacha Aleph. We're learning today Daf Mem Tes, but we're going to begin on Daf Mem Ches, Amid Beis, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid by the 2 dots. I know that we read it quickly at the end of the last year, and we're going to go over it. The Mishnah gave us the rule that in order to prevent truma from becoming tamei, even when there's a mixture of tahor and tamei flour, obviously the flour prior to being made into a dough, being that it was never made wet yet, it's not even susceptible to becoming tamei. So the fact that flours, pure, impure, are mixed in itself is not the issue. But the moment you add water to it, in other words, you make it into dough, here, if you were to have a kibetza amount of tamei or more, which is the minimum amount needed for food that's tamei, to be able to impart tuma, you're going to have yourself a problem. And therefore, the Mishnah gave us the 4 solutions, either to make the dough into small ones, small loaves, small doughs, nikudim, or to toast the grain, etc. But we're going to focus simply on the nekudim. Now, I just want to say the following, that I know I'm saying it now by the intro, and then we're going to learn it again. It's really important to keep the cases of the Mishnah separated one from the other. The first time that the Mishnah, in the beginning of the Perek, on Daf Mem Hey, told us about the solution of making dough into small loaves was in the case where there was 1 sa'ah of truma that was pure, truma tohira, that fell into less than 100 sa'ah of chulin temeim. So let's say you had 99 chulin temeim. So forget about the truma and the chulin. Just think about the pure and the impure. There is only 1 sa'ah of pure, and let's say there's 99 sa'ah of impure. That means that from every 100, only 1% is pure. 99% is impure. It was there that the Mishnah, when we learned before in the Gemara, that says one of the solutions will be to make the flour into very small loaves called nekudim. Well, we said you have to make them into loaves that are less than an egg. The Gemara said a half an egg. It doesn't have to mean a half an egg. It means less than the size of an egg. Why was that said? Why does it have to be that small? Because the vast majority, 99%, is tummy. Now, that's where we're going to start today's share. I know we learned it. We're just going to relearn it properly. We're learning about the case where there was 1 saw of truma timeya that fell into 100 sa'in of chulin tohirin. So first of all, there's no meduma because you have the ratio to nullify the truma. Second of all, we learned you have to separate and give to the kohen 1 sa. But don't forget, from this mixture, how much of it, let's say proportion-wise, is tamei? 1 in 101. 100 is tar, only 1 is tamei. Yet the Chachamim said, Rabbi Eliezer says, and as we learned in the last year, 2 ways of understanding Rabbi Eliezer, that the saw that you remove from this 101 mixture has to be burnt. The Chachamim say it could be eaten, but you have to make it into small loaves. So we're going to start today's share explaining this small loaf means a half a saw, not a half an egg. And we'll go into the numbers today, and we'll see why that it mamish fits. After that, we're going to finally open up with the statement of Chizkiah. Our Mishnah, like we just explained, speaking about the case 1 saw truma temeya that fell into 100 saw of chulin tohirin, that you have to l'chachamim separate 1 saw and give it to the kohen, but the kohen has to take precautions for it not to become tamei. The Mishnah never spoke about what happens with the remaining 100. Chizkiah is the one that's going to say that even the remaining 100 can only be eaten nekudim. And again, the nekudim share will be a half a saw, but it can only be eaten nekudim. And the question is why the remaining 100 saw is chulin? And the answer is, since you have to remove from this chulin chala, Challah has a status of truma. Avada, we prefer for the challah to be challah that's tahar. So even regarding the remaining, you have to take precautions for it not to become tummy. This is what Chizkiah says. Now that is predicated, that's based on a big chiddush, which is, you would think that just like truma is resolved if the ratio is 100 to 1, in other words, a non-kohen is not allowed to eat truma. But if one soft truma falls into 100 of chulin, aside of the din that we have to remove one to give to the kohen, but the remaining mixture is allowed to be eaten by a non-kohen. There used to be one saw of truma mixed into it. That's the whole rule, that it's batal, even midrabanan, in the ratio of 100 to 1. You know what's batal? The truma is batal, but tuma is not batal. In other words, if tuma also were to be batal, then why would we have to be concerned with the remaining 100 saw? Don't forget, the first 100 saw was chulin to hoiden. One saw of truma fell in, you removed it. Okay, and lechachamim, that saw has to be eaten akudim. But the remaining, you would argue, is mamish bonafide chulin. Says Chizkiah, it's not true. That the tuma issue is not nullified even in the ratio of 100 to 1, and therefore you have to eat it nikudim. Now, the Gemara is going to quote a Tosefta. That's going to be very important. The Tosefta is going to be speaking about a scenario. Guys, forget about truma and chulin. It's much easier. It's a Tosefta in the Sechtas Chala. Just want to explain the word. The word Baraisa is the most generic word for all of the Torah Shebal Peh that was not included in the Mishnah in the times of the Tanoim. The word Tosefta means an addition. There are many Baraisas that were not even written as an addition to the Mishnah. There were written other halachas that are not written in the Mishnah explicitly. Toseftas are additions, like Tosfos, that were written on the Mishnah, but also they were not included in the Mishnah, so they are generally in the category of a Braisa, but I'm just going to refer to it as a Tosefta and Chala. There we're speaking about flour. Again, this flour was not yet moksher. Flour, some of it is tamei, some of it is tahar. It's all mixed together. And another thing, Aviv, whenever we speak about flours mixed together, we're going on the premise that it was mixed proportionally. So whatever the ratio was between tahar and tamei, it's not like they just touched each other. They were mixed together. So let's say the tamei was 20%. That would mean that whatever you remove from the flour has in it 20% tamei, 80% tahar, or whatever other the ratio is. The Tosefta says that when you remove the part that you want to render challah, same issue. You don't want the challah to be tummy. You know what you can do? You can add water to it, and you can say that the portion of the flour that's tahar should become challah, and the portion of flour that's tamei should remain chulin. Now, if the portion that remains tamei has the size of an egg, that wouldn't help you, because then the chulin would be metame the trum, the challah. But whenever the proportion is such, which the amount of the flour, which now turned into dough, is less than an egg, I don't care that it's mamish mixed together. It's a gavaldik thing. The Tosefta says, you just have to declare only the tar flour becomes challah. The tamei challah remains chulin tameim. Since it has less the size of an egg, it cannot impart tuma. A kohen is allowed to eat challah tohoiden, and a kohen is allowed to eat chulin tameim. By the way, anyone, Yisrael or kohen, if you eat midrabanan the amount of a kebeya umechza of any food that's tamei, you become tamei midrabanan. We're speaking about where it's less than an egg. So even if he wants to go into the Beis Hamikdash, he will not become tamei. That is what the Tosefta says. Now, there are two ways of understanding the Tosefta. All of this will be repeated. Today's daf is very important. One way of repeating that Tosefta would be that when you have this mixture and you make it into dough, you have to make them into small loaves to make sure that from every dough, from every little dough, from this mixture, when you remove the challah from it, the challah should have in it less than a kibetza of flour that's tamei, enough flour tahar. Don't forget, that which is not becoming challah doesn't count towards the challah. So the separation of challah has to have the shiur, which is 1 in 24. We'll get to the numbers later, of flour tahar. And the fact that you have mixed in it flour that will remain chulin tameim doesn't bother me if it's less than a kibetza. But you have to do it to the entire mixture. That will be one way of understanding the Braisa, which will be Rabbi Yochanan's ways of understanding the Braisa. Chizkiah understands the Braisa that it can even mean that all I need to do is, from this mixture, I have to remove one part. That all of it will be challah for all of the rest. I don't care if in all in the rest, when you turn all of the rest into dough, there's going to be in there more than an egg of the flour that's tamei, which would mean everything else becomes tamei as well. I don't care. Because Chizkiah holds that you are allowed to designate challah tahira for a dough that's tamei. This is a chiddush, because we learned before in this Masechta and Daf Tezvav that when it comes to truma, even though you would think, what's the problem? One is not allowed to separate truma tahira for produce that's tamei. Not allowed to do that. We learned maybe midrabanan, because menamukav. He will hold that by challah. Chizkiah holds by challah. There's no such issue. So the vort of the Tosefta is not something that you have to do to the entire mixture. You only have to remove one part, making sure that in that one part, which will entirely become challah minus the flour that's tamei, you have the right amount of flour, which will be 1 in 24 l'shem challah, dough that's tahar, and as long as in it you have, in addition to the 124 of everything, you have more flour that's tamei, as long as that is not kibetza or more, it can remain in there. So basically, you're giving a kohen, you would think you're giving the kohen challah, normally everything is holy. No, it's a mixture of holy and mundane. The holy is tahar, the mundane is tamei, and v'shalom al Yisrael. Really, whether one is allowed to separate challah tahira for dough that's tamei, be'emes is subject to a machlokes tanoim. So Rabbi Yochanan and Chizkiah really are amiroim, one paskening like one Tana and one paskening like the other Tana. This is the synopsis of today's daf.
Why would you want all the pile of dough to become tamei?
No, you don't want it to become tamei. But if you have a mixture of flour tahor and flour tamei, if you make doughs that are large enough, whatever the proportion is, I'm going to give you the proportions in the Gemara. The moment you have in one dough the amount of flour that's tamei in the size of a kibetza or more, that's going to make the whole dough tamei. Because Chizkiah holds you don't have to do that. You don't have to. If you want to do that, you can do that. He understands that the Tosefta will allow you only to take one dough out that has in it less than a kibetza of flour that's tamei, enough flour to be challah for everything else, and to declare that this separation is the challah for everything else, but not all of it. Only the tahor part. And that's good enough. And we're going to come back to that. Daf Mem Ches Amud Beis. I know that I gave a review of the daf, and we spoke, as we'll repeat again, about the 1 sa'ah of truma tameya into 100 chulin tohirin. Put that on a low shelf, because the Gemara here, v'hadei nekudin, here we're talking about like this. When the Mishnah originally introduced the concept of taking the 4 options. The first is making small loaves called nekudim, and the Gemara says we're speaking about making a loaf that's less than the size of an egg. That was in reference to the case where there was 1 sa'ah of truma tahira that fell into 99 sa'ah of chulin tameim. So first of all, the truma was not batal, right? Because he didn't have the ratio of 100 to 1. But that was a case where the vast majority was tamei. The minority is tahor. So first of all, it's meduma. And then the Mishnah says, and how will the kohen eat the kohen? However, he gets for free the saw. He pays the cheap amount for the other 99, but then he has to eat it. But he cannot make it tamei. So there, when the Mishnah says nekudim, the Gemara says less than an egg. Of course, less than an egg, because 99% is tamei. Basically, it's all tamei. In our case, it's the opposite. In our case, where you have 1 saw of truma tameya, it fell into 100 sa'ah of chulin tahirin. So you understand what's going on over here? So the Chachamim say, okay, separate the one. You have to always give one to the kohen. The Rabbi Eliezer says, burn it. The Chachamim say, don't burn it. Eat it nekudim. Okay, what is nekudim here? The nekudim, we don't want for there to be one egg of flour that's tamei. I got that. But let me ask you, in this mixture, you know how much you need to get one egg of flour that's tamei? If you have a mixture which 100 parts of the 101 parts is tar, only one that's less than 1% is tamei. So how much of that mixture is needed for you to have in it an egg that's tamei? Not an egg. An egg will have in it less than 1% of tamei. So really, you know what the real answer would be? 101 eggs. The real answer would be is you have to make loaves that are lesser than the amount of 101 eggs. That will be the simplest cheshbon. Because if you have less than 101 eggs, if you have 100, you began with 100 tar, and in addition, 1 tamei. So the proportion would be, I know the Mishnah spoke about sa. I'm speaking about eggs. If you make a dough, if the dough has the size of 101 eggs, then you can say 1 egg is tamei. Don't do that. The Gemara is saying that with a little nuance. So let's read it now inside. In our case, where the one saw was Truma Tameya, 100 chulin tohayrin, even though the Chachamim say that the one that you take out to give to the kohen could be eaten, not burnt. Nevertheless, it has to be nikudim or the other options. Here, kahado, chatzoi si'in, not a half an egg. Of course not. A half a saw. Now, I want to tell you how many eggs is a half a saw. I'll tell you right now. We're speaking here about 72 eggs. So even though I said 101 eggs, that's a chumrah midrabanan. I want to tell you just how we get there, because these numbers will have to be kept in our memories, at least short term, to understand the tosefta that we spoke out in the words of introduction. So 1 saw is comprised of 6 kav. 1 kav is comprised of 4 loig. Okay? 1 loig is comprised of 6 eggs. So let's go backwards now. If 1 loig is 6 eggs, and 1 kav is 4 loig, how many eggs do you have in a kav? 24. Times 6, because 6 kav in 1 saw, that's 144. A half a saw, what's half of 144? 72. Be'emes, if the Chachamim would allow me to go until the limit, they would tell me, make sure when you make the loaves, make sure that every loaf has less than 101 eggs. Because I'm going to go with the proportion of tamei and tar. I began with 1 tamei plus 100 tar. So from every 101, if the sheet is an egg, I'm going to have 1 egg. The Chachamim, the Gemara is saying, no, that's too close. Because you're going to make a loaf of 100 eggs or 99 eggs. You will think it's 99. Maybe you're going to have 101. So the way the saws a shear, 72 is a lot, relative a lot. I want to tell you another thing just to remember, that when we remove challah, the chiyuv midaraisa to remove challah is only if you begin with a dough of 43.2 or a fifth eggs, which, let's go, it's 4 pounds or 5 pounds. We're talking about, this is a lot more, 72. I know it's not double, it's almost double, it's a lot. I know this from my kitchen. So I'm saying, telling a person that you can't make a loaf bigger than 72 eggs is nish gefährlich. But you can't say here it means small bilkalach. It can't be that. That's what the Gemara is saying. And now we begin. So after we have the machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, in the case that we just mentioned, then you have to put on your thinking hat, 1 saw truma tameya. I'm repeating it again and again for me. 1 saw of truma tameya fell into 100 saw in chulun tohayda. L'kula alma, you got to remove 1. L'Rabbi Eliezer, you got to burn it. L'chachamim, you give it to the kohen and he can eat it nekudim. Nekudim a half a saw. The remaining, when you learn the Mishnah, you would think the remaining 100 is chulin. That's the whole point. Since it had the ratio of bittul, So the non-coin owner is not losing anything. He doesn't have to sell it b'demei truma to a coin. It's chulin. Says Chizkiah, no. Chizkiah Amar, afilu chulin shesham, even the remaining 100 saw, or 100, whatever measurement, lo yeyachlu ela nekudim, also can only be eaten by the non-coin owner, nekudim. By the way, nekudim here means the same thing it just meant before. Nekudim doesn't mean little loaves of a half an egg. Of course not. Same thing. Nekudim means 72 egg loaves, half a saw loaves. Okay, that's not what we got that. Why? But the question is why? It's chulin. Mipnei chalasan. Because there's another mitzvah that when you turn the flour into dough, you got to separate challah. We don't want for challah to become tamei. Challah is like truma. So here again, as long as you take precautions that in your dough, which is when you mix water into the flour, which is when everything becomes muksher, susceptible to becoming tamei. If you were to have in this dough 1 egg size, 1 egg volume or more of flour that's tamei, all else will become tamei as well. So then the challah that you remove will be tamei as well. To prevent from that from happening, you got to also take the same precautions, which is fine. So even though some of it is tamei, since it's less than the size of an egg, it cannot impart tumah. Now, I already mentioned the Tosefta. Prior to the Tosefta that we spoke out in the introduction, people are very troubled when they learn this, because what would it help, Aviv, to make small loaves? So what? Some of it is tamei. When you give it to the kohen as challah, how can he eat it, even if the remaining is not tamei? In other words, when you have a mixture of flour, tide, and tamei, even if you don't have the amount of a kibetza of flour that's tamei, so it won't impart it to the rest, but that flour is there. We already know the answer to that, because in all of these cases, when you declare it challah, you say only the tar flour in it will turn into challah. The remaining is chulin tameim. And since it's less than the size of a kebeya, the kohen can eat all of it. The challah shaboy, he's a kohen, and the chulin shaboy, there's nothing wrong even for a kohen to eat chulin tameim, ubifrat, that he won't even become tamei, that tumas gevia midrabanan, which only happens when you eat food, kebeitzo mertz, chatzi pras. Gewaltig. But why does Chizkiah even need for that precaution? Why? Why wouldn't we say that where did the Tuma come from in this case of it? One soft Truma to Meya. We said it's bottle. If you're worried about Tuma, worried about Truma, how can a non-kohen eat it? Because it's bottle. So clearly you see that even though the Truma is bottle, the Tuma is not. That's the beginning of today's Daf Memtez. Milsa Amra. You see from here, it comes out, Isur Zorus Batla. When you have the ratio, which we have here of 100 chulin to only 1 of Truma, a non-kohen is not allowed to eat. A Zod is not allowed to eat Truma. Doesn't matter. It was nullified. And even though it was nullified, the Isur Tuma loy Batla, the Tuma in it was not nullified. If not, because if you were to say that Memarashach, what fell in here? Truma Tameya. So is it halachically here or is it nullified? If we weren't to separate the Truma and the Tuma, we would say, since the Truma was nullified, the Tuma is nullified. So there's nothing Tameh here. If there's nothing Tameh here, why do you have to make it into small loaves? Knock yourself out. Make a loaf of 101 eggs. Make a loaf of 1,000 eggs. Who cares? So clearly you see, so that's the biggest chiddush of Chizkiah. Truma is nullified, Tuma is not nullified. And that's gewaldig, that's awesome. And now asks the Gemara, here Chizkiah is saying that the entire remainder 100, that's what he's saying. Clearly, right? The remaining 100, afilu chulem shesham, lo yeyachlu ela nekudim. That means all of it has to be made, divided into loaves that are small enough. I know we already said the shear. The loaves can be max 72 egg volume loaves, not more, which will guarantee that in each loaf, you have less than a kibetza, and now from each loaf you separate challah. Problem is that in ground zero of this topic, not of truma, of challah, let me just repeat the Tosefta, the Mishnah case, then forget about truma and chulin. Makes it easier. It's just challah. You have tahar and tamei flour. That's it. What proportion doesn't matter. What matters is that flour that never, when the grains were shamur from getting wet, matzah shmura, right? The shmura means you're not making sure it doesn't become chametz. Matzah shmura means you're guarding it, shouldn't get wet, which will make it into chametz. Wet is an issue for chimutz. Wet is an issue for mukhshar. When you have flour that we know was never mukhshar. So these flours being mixed in itself is not a problem. If the flours became mukhshar aviv, then everything is tamei already. If I have 1 egg volume of flour tamei mixed into, I don't care how much flour it's mixed together, I got a problem, especially if it's in the same receptacle. The case here is that the mixture of the flour in itself did not impart tuma, not because you don't have the shear needed, no, because the tahar never became wet to become mukhshar l'kabel tuma. But you're going to make it into dough. That's where the problem will begin. When you're going to make it into dough, l'chora, if you have aviv, 1 kibetza amount of tamei, everything else will become tamei, says the Tosefta and challah. Remove what you need for challah. Declare, make sure that in that there is no kibetza of tuma. Declare that only the tahar flour in it should become challah, and you are allowed to do it, even though it's mixed together. It's amazing. Because since you don't have a kibetza of flour that's tameya, the tahorin remain tahorin, as long as only the tahorin by themselves amount to the shear of challah necessary, because you can't get it both ways. I don't care if there's tuma mixed in there. That is what the Tosefta says. What's not clear in the Tosefta is 2 ways. Aleph, which is the way Rabbi Yechanan learns, that you have to take all of this mixture, you see what the proportion is, make them into loaves. The whole thing has to be divided into loaves in which every group by themselves has less than the kibetza of tameim, and from every loaf remove challah and figure out the ratio. I'm going to get to, it's not so that I'm going to give you a case of numbers in a moment, just to get the numbers. That's option number 1. The problem is that Chizkiah himself, when he learned that Tosefta says, you don't even have to do that. And that appears to contradict what he's saying over here. What does he say over there? I don't care. If you have in the bigger picture many, many, many eggs, all you need to do is remove 1 portion that in it there is less than a kibetza tameim, but enough flour to hoiden to give you the right shiur of 1 in 24, which is the shiur of challah for everything else. That's all you need to do. And declare that this is challah for that. But not all of it, only the flour that's tahar. So when it comes to the Tosefta in challah, Chizkiah was the one that says that you don't have to worry about the entire mixture when it comes to challah. Only worry about the one separation that you will turn into challah. Here, Chizkiah seems to be saying that the entire 100 saw, here we know the shiurim, was 1 saw of Truma Tameya in 100 saw of Chulin Tahoidim. Now you have 101 saw. But you from the 101, you gave 1 to the Kohen. Machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Let's go with the Chachamim. You gave it to the Kohen. He's going to eat it, Nekudim. Says Chizkiah that the whole remaining 100 saw has to be prepared in a way where the challah doesn't become tummy. Why would he say that? That's the question. Chizkiah appears to be inconsistent. Inconsistent. It's not a contradiction, but it's inconsistent. In other words, Chizkiah, by not saying the way Rabbi Yechanan understands Pshat and the Tosefta, l'chura, his leniency should have been verbalized over here. Now let's go to over there. Taman over there, the Tosefta in Challah, Chizkiah said, "Kama yehe beisa v'yehe yechoil lasis betara." Chizkiah, when he learned that Tosefta, he wanted to give you a number, and these numbers are important because in order for him to be able to give his case, where you only remove one removal, and we need for the tor shaboy to be enough challah for everything else, and it should not have the amount of an egg. It's not so simple to come to that scenario. It won't work in all of the scenarios. Many times, if you have a huge amount of dough, so the challah is going to be, again, it's 1 in 24. So whatever you begin with, you take and go for 24th. If the 24th is huge, because the beginning is super huge, you're going to have more than a kibetza. So Chizkiah says, let me tell you the case, what will be the right numbers? And I'm going with the girsa. We're taking out the words Chizkiah Amar, but the words are shtus arba kavin. Guys, halt up over here. You have a 1/6 of 4 kav of tame flour, a 1/6 of 4 kav of tame flour that got mixed into what's now a total of 4 kav. Now, let me give you the cheshbon. The cheshbon is, guys, how much is 4 kav? Aviv. 1 kav, we said, is 24. Very good. So Chizkiah says that Tosefta's case, to learn it the way he wants to learn it, only one separation. All of it will become challah minus the tame part. All of it together, a person has a total of 96 egg volume of flour, and a 1/6 of 96 is 16. You'll see why this number is going to, everything will fit. That when you have such a ratio, only over there are you able to learn Pshat and the Tosefta the way he learned it, as we'll learn on Amud Beis. I'm going to get into why these numbers are perfect. You'll see that if the total mixture is more than that, you're going to end up with more than an egg or more of tamei. If the mixture of Aviv is less than that, then what you remove, you won't have enough to separate challah. Don't forget, guys, the chiyuv of challah only begins when you have a dough of 43.2 eggs. So even though I'm using this to be challah for that, this also has to have that shear. When I have 96 eggs total that have in it only a 1/6, exactly, not more or not less, which are 16 eggs, we'll see how that number works. Now, what Chizkiah is trying to say with this cheshbon, before you get into the details, is that not the way Rabbi Yochanan learns. Rabbi Yochanan learned the Tosefta. He said very simple. He said the entire mixture should be made into small doughs. Every dough, when you remove the challah from it, there'll be less than an egg. Chizkiah is saying, no, you don't need that. You can have a case where you have a lot. You have a total of 96. You have a total of 96. That's the total of everything. We're going to see soon exactly how much you remove. In the 96, 16 is tamei. Here is where you can make one separation. He didn't tell you the number yet. And that one separation will have enough tahor to be challah, and the tamei will be less than an egg. In other words, you don't have to make all of the mixture into nekudim. That's the bottom line. So that's the kasha. So over there, he's giving you a scenario where you get to make one dough challah for the bigger dough, which can become tamei. But over here, Chizkiah is saying that all of the 100 remaining chulin, that's what Chizkiah is saying, has to be made in a state of nekudim. Why? So answers the Gemara, Pashit, Amar Rabbi Yosi, that Taman, I want to say, what does Taman mean? Taman means over there. We are learning Masechtas Trumas. When we're learning it, Taman means Challah. Rabbi Yosi was asked this question when he was learning Masechtas Challah. So the over there means over here, just not to get confused. Taman, literally meaning over there. In our case, it means over here. Why did Chizkiah say that you have to make every dough? The whole 100 chulin has to be made into relatively smaller loaves. That's because this genius, before separating challah, already added the water. b'shegibel v'achar kach hifrish. So Chizkiah is saying, if you already, my friends, added the water before you separated challah, if you got an egg, a flour that's tamei here, the whole thing is messed up. So when you are adding the water to the flour prior to separating challah, says Chizkiah, you got to make sure that regarding all of it, you never had any mixture that had in it a kibetza, a flour that's tamei. But over here, meaning in the Tosefta, he's speaking about someone who didn't want to have to make everything into small loaves. And there is such an option. So what do you need to do? Remove the right amount of flour needed. What will that right amount be? That the tahar in it will be the shear of challah, and the tamei in it will be less than a kibetza. If you get that right, which is in the case where you have a sixth of 96 eggs, then you don't have to worry about the remainder. Which is great. What's really Chizkiah is standing by Yeshita. Chizkiah is only concerned regarding the challah. The challah has to remain tahor. That's all he cares about. Now, if the person, before separating challah, already added water, then you got yourself a problem. Because if in whatever he added water to, if in there you have a kibetza of flour that's tamei, everything became tamei already before you remove the challah. So if a guy is making it into dough before he's separating the challah, that is where Chizkiah says, make sure that you never did it in any of the remaining chulin where you have a kibetza of flour that's tamei. Over there in the Tosefta and challah, we're speaking about a person that they can have a large amount. They can have a large amount. And like we said, the case that he's giving, 96 eggs, 16 tamei. In the case where there's 16 eggs tamei, if you want to make everything into a dough that none of them will have a kibetza in it, how many doughs will you have to make it into? 17 doughs. All what Chizkiah is saying is, you don't have to make it 17 doughs. Before you add the water, remove the right amount. He didn't say what that is. That's going to be the right amount where the tarred flour will be enough needed for everything, and the tamei will be less than an egg, and then you can add water to the entire rest. Okay. The ideal time separate challah is after you make it into dough. And by the way, he's not saying otherwise over here. Chizkiah is just saying that be smart. If you don't want to have to turn everything into 17 loaves, in the case that we're giving, a guy says, I don't want 17 little loaves. I want to have one big loaf. Okay. So remove the right amount. He didn't say what that is. He's just saying, begin calculating when you have a total of 96 eggs, 16 of it is tamei and the rest is tar. Now, Amar Ababo, let's go to these numbers. That kol yomenu hayinu toyim bazeh. That before we understood the way this is so exact what Chizkiah said, we stumbled upon this kamakel hazeh shel suma, like the blind man stick. It's interesting how the mashal still works perfectly today. When you see, God forbid, a person who's blind, so they have the walking stick. So it's good because if something is in front of them, right, they feel it. They don't bump into a beam, but they don't know exactly what's in front of them. So that's a very good mashal that we understand where Chizkiah is going. No, he's trying to give you the right numbers for you, again, for you to get it right with the tar and not too bad with the tuma. But no one ever spelled out why these numbers are meduyak. Ad shelamdua min hacheshbon gematria, until someone in the Beis HaMedrash went through the mathematical calculation, and you'll see how beautiful the mathematical calculation works. Daf memtes amid beis. Okay, now let's go. By the way, Chizkiah never said the word 96 eggs, right? He said that a sixth of 4 kab. So the Gemara is talking it out right now. Kama avad. How much egg volume do you have of flour? We're talking about flour, not about eggs. But how much flour volume do you need to get to the measurement, to the Talmudic measurement of a kav? So 24 volume of eggs. That's the meaning of esrim v'arba bein. Okay. Arba kabin kama avdi. So when Chizkiah said that the Tosefta to learn it the way he is giving you the easiest way out, the least headache, is when you're starting with 4 kab. Okay, so 1 is 24, so 4 is 96. So Tishan v'seish bein. And he said, for you to succeed in only having to be concerned about one dough and not for you to have to make, like here, 17 doughs, what proportion in it is tamei? Shtus, a sixth. A sixth of 96 is 16. How do I know that's accurate? Because Vlad is quiet. If it would be wrong, he would be shouting through the machine over here. Okay, so now we're good. Now this is so good. How big of a dough? How big of a dough do you have to make sure? How many eggs do we need for the dough to be the right amount? That's what we're looking for right now. Let me word it this way. You have 80 tahar and 16 tamei. Challah has to be given from a balabas, 1 and 24. Vlad, what's 1/24 of 96?
I believe it's 4.
You believe correct. That's it. So it's 4 eggs. So this is gavaldik. Now you'll chap what's going on over here. Okay, don't forget, guys. You need the right amount, but don't forget from tahar. The tahar is for the tummy. No, we don't say 80 is tahar, but 16 is tummy. I only have to remove challah for the 80. That we don't say. You have 96 egg volume. You have to remove 1 and 24. You have to give the amount of 4 egg volume as challah, but you can't separate 4 egg volume because the whole chap of the Tosefta is that you are dafka saying the tamei part of the flour and now of the dough is remaining chulin. How much do you need to separate for you to have in the proportion where 80 is tar and 16 is tamei, or a sixth of the total is tamei? So if you were to remove, let's say, 6 eggs amounts, how much would you have over there that's tamei? 1 egg, which would be a problem. If you were to remove 4 eggs, you wouldn't have 1 egg tamei, but you wouldn't have the right amount of tar flour for challah, because you need a total. You're only making the tar shaboy. It's gavaldik. Into challah, you need to have 1/24 of 96 is 4 egg volume. So how many eggs do you remove, Aviv? 5 eggs. When you remove 5 eggs, since the tamei is a sixth, which means it's less than an egg. Don't forget, really, if you would go more precise, you don't even have to remove 5 eggs. You don't even have to remove that. But Chazal never did that. Everything is rounded off. That's why it's perfect. If you were to remove 6, which is more than what you need, then you got yourself a problem. But that's why Chizkiah gave you a scenario where you don't need to have to remove 6. There's a total of 96. All you need really is 4. That's tar. So when you remove 5, it works. Yeah, see, there's a balance on both sides. On one hand, you have to have the right amount. On the other hand, you can't have too much of tamei. This is exactly the way it works. This is the area where you get it good in both ways. Now, if you were to have a smaller dough, the moment you go to under 46, 43.2, you're b'chlal not chayiv and challah. And I'm not talking about the little dough. We're speaking about separating the dough and rendering this entire dough. This is great. So, yigabel shis. If you were to need 6 eggs, which aside of the fact that it's more than what you need from the tahar shaboy, but here you got the biggest problem. Yesh kan beitza tameya. If you're going to remove only 4 egg volume, you don't have an egg of tamei flour / dough. You don't have that. The problem is, even though you removed 4, and 4 eggs is all you need for the 96 eggs, because 4 eggs is 1 in 24, but that's not going to work on this Tosefta, because you have a mixture of Tamei and Tard. The Chiddush of the Tosefta is, you don't have to make all of it into Challah. You say clearly, only the Tard Shaboy. A sixth of the 4 is Tamei. You don't have the right amount. So Ketzad Oisa, Migbal Chamesh, remove from the 96, remove, instead of making 17 little loaves, instead of dividing it into 17, which would be one solution of making sure that the 16 eggs, right, not a single dough will have in it 1 egg. This is great. So what do? Migbal Chamesh. And V'noitel Arba. You got it? You need 5. In the 5, how much is a 16 of 5, guys? It's 0.83. I know that, not because I'm Vlad, because I used the calculator yesterday. But it's good. In other words, how much tamei is in it? Less than an egg. The only thing that's imprecise in this cheshbon is that you're giving a little bit more than necessary, which doesn't matter because they always round off the numbers. I'm just making that clear. Okay.
So after you give the 5, do you take 1 back, or you?
No, you give it all to the kohen. And the kohen pays for that amount as chulin tameim. Point is that he gets to eat it because even a kohen is allowed to eat chulin tameim. Good point. You don't have to gift that to the kohen, but you give it's mixed together. You don't know which part of it is tamei, which part of it is. You don't know that. It's like meduma. It's like meduma, like truma and chulin. If it's not nullified, you have to give it all to the kohen. I want to just go through some more numbers. If we're going to go with the 96, 4 kav, 96 egg volumes. If a 5th of it were to be tamei, not a 6th. How much would you have to remove? If you were to remove now the 5 egg volume, if a 5th of it is tamei, you're removing the 5 egg volume. 5 egg, you know what that would mean? It would mean that 1 egg is tamei. That's why Chizkiah is saying we're speaking about a case where only a 6th of it is tamei. For you to be able to do what he's suggesting, not needing to do what Rabbi Yochanan is saying, which is divide everything in a way where not a single loaf and then from everyone take off the challah. No, it has to be that it's a 6th. Okay.
So, does he agree that if it was a 5, you could take like 2 smaller loaves out of the big loaf?
One more time.
Does Chizkiah agree that, let's say, if a 5th of the mixture is tuma, then you can take 2 loaves, like 2 loaves of 2.5 the week.
Rabbi Yochanan holds that if I want to answer your question, I want to read of it that if 16 egg volumes of tamei flour are present, the challah portion will remain tard only if the total amount of flour in the mixture is a bit more than 5 saw. Of 5 saw. There's another detail. In other words, just to make that clear, I just have to speak it out. In the case that Chizkiah gave, Rabbi Yochanan cannot say make it into 17 loaves. Why not? Because you need for every loaf to have the amount of 43.2. For you to have a case where you have 17 loaves and every loaf has 43.2, you're not starting out with 93. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan, who was understanding that you have to separate the mixture into separate loaves and from each one give off challah and make sure that in each one there's less than an egg, he understands that the Tosefta is speaking about a huge number. The cheshbon that they made for Rabbi Yochanan, we're speaking about 734.4 egg volumes, which will be enough if you have a calculator. How much is Vlad? 734 divided into 17. Mistama 43.2.
I don't have a calculator in front of me.
But I'm saying more or less.
Yeah,
744.
no, it seems right. 40 something.
40 something. That's the word. In other words, in Higayon, all Rabbi Yechanan says is you have to make it into separate loaves. Make sure that every loaf has less than it. But Rabbi Yechanan's starting point has to be much more. Whatever volume of eggs are, if you have 16 eggs, it's all mixed together, you got to make 17 loaves. If you have 10 eggs, you got to make 11 loaves. In other words, Rabbi Yechanan holds that you cannot separate one for everything else. And Chizkiah says that if you know what you're doing, you can separate one separation, all prior to you adding the water. That's the key. And there's a case, there is a hechatimsa where you're going to have the right amount of tar. You're not going to have the egg, and that is 4 kav and a sixth, and it worked. Says the Gemara that Milsia the Chizkiah Amra. From the words of Chizkiah, it comes out, Bilvat shaloi tehei kibetza temeya noigas baguma. In the Kalim, in the times of Chazal, they had big utensils, and in the utensils, they had separate indentations. And what's the whole point of Chizkiah? You don't have to worry about the tumah when it comes to all of it. Put in a guma, like we just mentioned. How many eggs of volume? 5. It's mamash gavaldik. 5 egg volume will give you 4 tahar for everything else, and the one tamei, and the one is less than an egg. The proportion that's tamei. Maybe it's going to be metame everything. That's another thing. We're not worried about that. The reason why truma tahoira may not be given for food that's tamei was because of this minamuka, because it might become tamei. By chala, Chizkiah holds that we're not worried about that. Dafnun. Milsa the Rabbi Yechanan Amma, but from the sheet of Rabbi Yechanan doesn't allow you to do what Chizkiah says. He's machayiv you to separate everything into separate loaves. In other words, Rabbi Yechanan holds that all of the flour must remain tahar. And why does Rabbi Yechanan hold that all the flour must remain tahar? I know I'm giving the reason. The reason behind it is because we are afraid that if at the end of the day, think about this, Aviv, according to Chizkiah, you remove 5 eggs from 96. So what do you have left? 91. You're going to put water into it. In that, how many eggs do you have? Around, let's say, 15 plus. You have enough tumah. Everything is tummy. Maybe this will touch that. This challah is for that. What did you accomplish by having challah that's tohira? Maybe the challah will now touch that. That will impart tumah. He's not worried about that. Where do we have that machlokes? That's a machlokes that we have tanoim in mesechtes challah. That's another thing that the Gemara is really trying to say. In other words, when it comes to truma, we learned that you're not allowed to separate truma tohira for produce that's tamei. In Mesechtas Chala, there are Tanoim that argue whether we have that same restriction by Chala or not. That is the machlokes between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yechanan. That Rabbi Yechanan follows the Tanoim that hold you're not allowed to separate Chala to Hoira for an Isa, that's Tameya, because they're going to end up touching each other. And everything will become Tamei. So it's much better for you to separate everything in a way where not one single loaf has in it an egg of flour that's tummy. So nothing could impart tuma to the challah. And Chizkiah has no such chashash. That was great. Chavra, l'chaim. To be continued. We're not done yet. We have another daf for this, God willing, Monday.